In this episode, we're going to talk to Alex Paradies from TapRooT, and we're going to focus on Precursor incidents. Very organic episode. I love the conversation I had with Alex, and hope to have Alex back very soon to continue our conversation. But look, Alex brings a lot of experience to the table, so I'm going to let this episode speak for itself. Let's get ready. Before we get into today's topic, I want to remind everybody, if your business is reopening after any kind of closure due to COVID, or you've continued to remain open, but you're struggling with how to mark your facilities to ensure physical distancing and relay important information about safety and health as it relates to COVID, I want you to go visit our friends over at MightyLine Floor Tape. MightyLine has some great products for you to mark your floors, whether it be the stand here, the 6 feet distancing, or just floor tape to denote lanes of travel. They have everything you need to mark your facilities. So hit the link in the show notes, visit our friends at MightyLine Floor Tape. They are incredible partners in safety. I can't thank them enough for their support of the podcast. Again, MightyLine Tape for all of your floor marking needs. All right, Alex Paradies. I asked your dad when I interviewed him if that's the proper pronunciation of the word.
You got it exactly right.
Because it can't be that cool. That's like the coolest name. It's up there with like wolf or, badger. I don't know. Paradies. That's a pretty cool name. So just give us a little background about you, what you do, and we'll get right into our topic today.
Yeah, so my background prior to working for System Improvements, I was in manufacturing for about a decade, working in lean industrial engineering. I was in operations. I managed about half of a plant across multiple shifts. So my background's very much in getting things to work and making sure we can get them to the customer on time. Now I'm working for System Improvements. I'm an instructor with TapRooT, teach people incidents and how to investigate incidents and accidents.
Man, you are speaking my language. As a safety professional exclusively for my entire career coming out of the fire service, I have often said, all safety management, at the end of the day, it's all about preventing, people from getting injured, that whole human side of things. But in the workplace, an accident is waste in a process. And we've got to solve for that. If we're about getting that work done, providing that goods and service to that customer, accidents stop us from doing that. It's different in the quality systems side of things in that it also causes harm to somebody, that just increases the need to focus on it, in my opinion, right? That added tragic piece of that equation. But I love that. It's about solving problems and keeping things moving. So
yeah, I think safety is a lot about preventing harm of our employees. Quality is about preventing harm of our customers, and operations is about preventing harm of the bottom line.
Yeah, there you go. I love it. But the word you kept using is preventing, like prevention. And so there, in large part, when I was going through lean training myself, getting my green belt, these are a common set of problem-solving tools that we can apply to different problems in the business, right? Quality, supply chain flow, process flow, operations, and safety. So that's what I love about safety. I call it the universal truth. I don't care what culture, what part of the world you're in. There is that basic human need to be safe and secure before you could even reliably and efficiently focus on something else. So if we could solve for that, it kind of unlocks, it like opens the floodgates to like all kinds of productivity and quality improvements. It's almost a fool's errand to try to double down on quality improvements when you have uncontrolled hazards in that same workplace, in that same work process, that you're asking the operator to focus on quality and they're trying to keep an eye on like not getting injured. If you could solve for that, it allows them to focus on those other things. So that's why I love safety. So that's my soapbox. I'll put it away. So. All right. As you can see, I'm on the road. I'm in my hotel room, and I'm in beautiful downtown Nashville, Tennessee. So you're not too far. Your offices, right?
No, we're not too far. We're in Knoxville. We put up what looks like hotel curtains just so we can match you there.
There you go. So misery loves company, as they say. All right. So topic today, we are going, anybody listening and watching, and if you've listened to this podcast or watched our videos in the past, you know I'm not big on scripts. I love to just have meaningful conversations. We have some guardrails, if you will, but I like to see where the conversation takes us. So I think we loosely settled on, talking a little bit about precursor incidents, near misses, whatever you want to call them, and maybe touch on Heinrich's trying. I know that's a big thing in the safety world. To Heinrich or not to Heinrich, I guess, if I could say it that way. So let's just get into that. When you talk to people about precursor incidents and the need to really move the needle from reaction, I still say near misses are reactive. They're lagging because it's an event that took place or almost took place that somebody reports to us and we have to go back and look at. So we're not even really in the predictive, side of things, right? But no loss has occurred by definition. So it's a free opportunity to improve processes. So let's get into like how you talk about precursor incidents and the importance of diving into those, and the big question of, well, if nothing happened, why would I bother? So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different levels of the conversation that we have, and it kind of starts off with, there are people that, well, they know to investigate the big stuff, right? Somebody got severely injured. We had an amputation or a fatality. We know we've got to do a good job investigating those. And then there's all these people that are caught stuck investigating what I call the really small stuff. It's the paper cuts, it's the Band-Aids, right? It's those really small things. And people often get these things confused about, well, I know that's important to do the big stuff, but I have all these little things. And so I don't really have time to investigate, even do a good job with the big things, because I've got all these little things I've got to investigate. And so a lot of those conversations for me start with people that are trying to figure out, where do they really need to set that investigation line for where do they need to do an investigation versus reporting it out.
And when you say investigation, you mean like a deep dive, like the whole hog?
So, with TapRooT, we kind of talk about it in two ways. We've got our major incident 7-step process, and then we've got a simplified low to medium risk incident process. Now, yeah, it's going to be a whole hog for some people because we're going to understand what happened. We're going to find those mistakes that led to it. We're going to do root cause analysis. But I think there's a difference between the level of rigor that you do, even if you're going to follow a really robust process for both. I think that level of rigor has to be flexible for these low to medium risk incidents. I can think of a time that we had at one of my facilities, and they had a paper cut, but it was a paper cut to the eyeball. So when you think of like, oh, it's a paper cut, this isn't a big deal. Well, it required major eye surgery. So you have to step back and say, okay, is this, how severe is this? Is this something we're really going to go and fix? And for that story, for your listeners that might be interested, what occurred, this person was doing filing, right? They've got papers, they're just filing. It's the summertime. It's kind of hot in the office, and they had a fan on. And then while they were filing, that fan blew a piece of paper into their eye and cut them. Now, they're an office worker. Do they need safety glasses on? It was a question. So, we had to have this big discussion as a management group. Okay, do we require safety glasses at all times in the facility? And do we eliminate all fans, right? And is this an incident that's either so rare that we didn't think it was going to happen again? Or is it something that, hey, the risk exists, so we're just going to eliminate this and put in place these fixes?
Now, you're asking some questions that, like, there's two groups in safety professionals that I talk to. And one group, I would say the larger group, is they're afraid to ask that question. They're afraid to go, this was so rare. Like, what is well, there's two things. There's likelihood and then there's probability, right? And they're two different things. What is the probability that is going to happen again? Not the likelihood. The likelihood would say you have a fan and you're shuffling papers. How likely is that? Well, I mean, if a fan's blowing on you, obviously it's probably likely. But what's the probability? Meaning like, okay, this is one person, not that many people do it. It's only done once in a blue moon. Like the probability is pretty low, unless I'm getting this wrong. The other group the minority, I would call it, and this is just my experience and by no means scientific, would ask the questions you're asking about. Do you run into that when you do your coaching sessions and you run your sessions, that people are shocked that you would say, there is, if you start with this kind of medium to low, approach, from that, you'll know if you've got to go whole hog, right? You'll know if there's something more to dig for, right? But if you at least start with this, you'll know. So you're not saying there's no process for minor near misses. There's just an abbreviated, it's one to get you started, and you'll know right away if you got to take that leap, right?
Yeah. So essentially, the way we think about it is, we have what we call the off ramp, right? It's the nothing more to learn, and you have to gather the facts first, right? I've got to at least have a basic understanding of what happened. Now, again, how much time you spend on that is really dependent on the resources you have available. So, if I'm really constrained for my, let's say, safety resources, if we're talking a safety incident, I may just collect some initial facts. And at that point, we're going to say, okay, what occurred that we know about? Is this something we really want to spend more resources on to really fully understand? And so that's where that kind of comes in, because if you kind of see there's nothing more to learn in there, is it really worth the resources and pushing more? I had a class that I was teaching in Nashville, actually. It was in Nashville, and the guy had brought an incident where they were driving on a company vehicle on a back road in West Virginia. So they were on a back road in West Virginia. Anybody West Virginia listeners, they'll know the kind of road I'm talking about. It's curvy, it's narrow, and they're driving a work truck, big old truck, and a school bus was coming down the opposite direction. So they were driving from one site to another site, and there's a school bus. So what did they do? Well, they just slightly pulled off to the side into kind of like that little edge of the road, and that edge caved in.
Ooh.
And their truck rolled. Now the truck rolled, landed back on its tires. The guy wasn't hurt. Obviously no school bus or any injuries. The truck drove off, was fine. Put the quotes on the word fine there. So is that an incident that we're going to learn something from? And that was a conversation. They brought that one to the class as their final exercise incident. And, I had them build out the snap chart, but I could tell right away, I go, what's the opportunity here? We don't control the roads.
Mm-hmm.
We have a little bit of control of when people are driving to work, but not as much as you'd think. We have a little bit. So it's like, are we going to establish rules that you never go drive during school hours? What's our fix? Is it we're going to change the sizes of all our trucks?
Yeah.
No pulling off for trucks. So you take that school bus got to get out of the way.
Right.
So the opportunities there are really low compared to the amount of resources it takes to go and do I call thorough investigation, right? We could do a cursory one to get some of these facts, but to really get thorough, that's going to take a little more time. And so,
and you are bringing up some tough, like, a lot of people struggle with this, right? Because the knee-jerk reaction is we could fix we could eliminate anything, or we could fix anything. And it's like, we're not saying you can't. What we're saying is if you follow this process every time, right, you will get to a point where it's like, okay, what can we reasonably control? Or practicably is another word I like to throw around. How practicable is it? Like you said, we can't control the roads. There's no shoulder, right? A school bus is coming. Forget school hours, like before and after school. They could have been going on a field trip. I mean, you're not going to be able to control that thing. The issue then becomes like probability and likelihood, right? Like was that just an off chance of all the hours we spend on the road, that specific situation, how often does that arise? And can we really practically, get back to your beginning, do anything about it? What can we learn? And then so you have to kind of come to grips with that, right?
Yeah, and I think there's maybe not two schools of thought with getting to zero or not.
Right.
I believe that companies can get to zero harm. I've seen it done.
Yeah.
I've seen it done at least on a from a fatality standpoint. I've absolutely seen it done for we have a lot of clients that go, we don't kill people anymore, and that's what we want. I think everybody that has those facilities where you kill people, you don't want to do that. None of us want to. So I think we can get to zero fatalities. Getting to zero risk, I don't see that as something that's a perfect goal anyway. You can get to minimized risk, and maybe we'll say optimally minimal risk, but getting to zero risk, we're not. I've got to get to work. So how am I going to get to work and not assume some level of risk while driving?
I use the phrase managed risk.
Yep.
You're absolutely right. There is no such thing as risk-free. And I've often told even safety professionals, I'm like, you know what? If you want risk-free, tell all the workers to stay home. That's not an option. Okay, so now let's have a conversation about how we manage risk to an acceptable level. And what's acceptable is driven by many different sources. Could be regulatory, like minimum regs. Even those don't go that far, right? Industry standards, what's practicable and reasonable, like how much resources do we have, right? But everyone's driven by the legal part. Well, you could say legally that's acceptable. I've managed my risk down to the minimum federal, state, and local standards. Well, you could still have incidents and you could still have fatalities complying with the minimum standards. So I think you're right. It's a very tough conversation, but you got to have some standard definitions by which you have this discussion, and that's why I use the term managed risk. Have we managed risk effectively? Because that's what you're doing. You're dealing with the rest. You've eliminated what you can, but you're managing the rest. That risk is still there. You've just built in some things to manage it to an extent. But yeah. So let's kind of shift gears into this whole, and I know we wanted to touch on, I know I wanted to touch on this. I got listeners that are always asking about this, Heinrich's triangle. So let's make the jump to, if we could pull an Evel Knievel and make this leap, to the Heinrich triangle and the relationship between, and this is kind of where, when we started off, this is where I'm going to make the connection. Folks will say, yeah, but wait, Blaine, Alex, for every serious incident, we have this many first aids. And for that many first aids, we have this many near misses. And if we want to prevent that one fatality, we have to prevent all of them. And I'm like,
fix all those Band-Aids. Got to fix all the Band-Aids.
Right. Which I'm not saying that's not true. That we absolutely have to focus on what I would call precursor incidents, right? I mean, if we're intervening at that level, you're less likely to have more serious incidents because we have a robust system to address them at the early stages, or as we learn about our processes and we have our people reporting. That doesn't mean there's a direct correlation to, somebody cut off the tip of their pinky. Well, then technically I should have this many first aids for pinkies and this many near misses for pinkies. That's not exactly how it works. So you kind of walk us through your methodology and approach to that.
So, when we think about the Heinrich pyramid, there's an idea of what they call the diamond model, but essentially out of those, we've got a pinky, a severed pinky. There's an idea that we have so many near misses where somebody maybe cut their finger, and so many near misses where somebody could have cut a finger. Mm-hmm. Well, realistically, what you can actually report, capture, and find out isn't going to be, we had 500 of these opportunities to have noticed that somebody could have cut their finger there. it's a little bit more narrowed than that. And so when we're looking at these things, you've got to establish some criteria for what was the potential harm that could have come from this. So those band-aids, right? Those, and I think of the band-aid ones, those are somebody got cut by something sharp, right? But what was the potential there? Was it really an opportunity to have a severed finger, or is this a paper cut? And and paper is really sharp. And I think I watched a funny YouTube video the other day that was, watching the different things that paper can cut through.
Yeah.
But that's the paper will more than likely never sever a finger. There are probably, the guys that are at the paper mill are going to come back and tell us, no, this is how it'll cut your finger, when that thing's
Yep.
running at this RPM. But the majority of these, our risk level needs to be figured out so that we could say, hey, this had the potential for greater harm. And that potential needs to be really well understood. So one of the recommendations that I've at least seen that I thought was decent, that I felt was a good way to do it, is giving some general criteria for harm, that if we see this kind of incident, because we have a rough idea of the kind of things that people can get severely injured from at most of our facilities. And so if we have an incident similar to that, that's one that would warrant further investigation. So I'll give an example from my background. I came from bearing manufacturing. So we made large, round, shiny things. We made bearings for wind energy, oil and gas, big bearings, 3-inch to 84-inch OD. So big, heavy metal rings.
Yeah.
Um, so the kind of injuries that we would really want to avoid is somebody having one of these giant metal rings crush some body part, right? Hands, feet, arms, things like that. That's a very severe injury point, so those are the kind of things, if you had something fall, well, that has a potential for severe injury. I had one of the guys who was working on my site. He had he was falling off a ledge, a small little, like, one step. His knee gave out and he started to fall. And he went and he grabbed the part, and it slid off a granite table, and it almost fell right on top of him. If it had hit his shin bone, it would have shattered his shin. It would have, just because it was probably 200-pound metal ring and falling from a table height, essentially.
At velocity. Yeah.
That would have broken his shin probably. And he was fortunate because it fell and it landed and dented the concrete floor, took a chunk out of the concrete floor next to his leg, and then fell over on his leg. So he still had a pretty substantial bruise, but it didn't shatter the leg. Now, it's an incident? Is it a near miss? Well, it's a near miss from a term of shattering a man's leg.
Mm-hmm.
It's an incident because, yeah, he was injured. He did have a bruise. So that goes again. We say, okay, well, what's the potential for harm? This is something we really want to focus on and spend time on. Versus, again, you take that paper cut example from a facility. Yes, that's pretty significant, but is this something that had the real potential to be more than that? Not
Well,
really.
so
That's
now you got me thinking. Now I'm like laser focused on this incident. But the root, or one of the root cause, was his knee giving out, or the direct cause of him. Well, you gotta go backwards. You gotta go, well, what caused that thing to fall? He yanked on it. I mean, it's supposed to move. If it's on a granite table, they obviously move it, right? And they're working on it. His knee gave out and he reached out. So what's the probability of somebody's knee giving out like that again in that spot, where somebody reactively, without thinking, just reaches out and grabs the nearest thing, and it happens to be that thing that falls on him? So on the surface, we got to stop things from falling. Maybe you put an edge on the granite, and it's like, well, is that practical? Does that interrupt our production process? But then I go back to the probability thing, which is, no. What caused him to have to pull that? And is that something we can control?
Yeah. So if you looked at that example, what we found out in that investigation, that he was about 74 years old. So he's a little bit older. He had a bad knee. This was known. He had a bad knee. It was known that his knee had gone out before
Mm.
on a couple things, and so he was one of the senior guys in that crew. And so he would help out. He'd do setups, and he was one of my best operators. But he had a couple, you find out these after the fact, right? Oh, he had a couple, times his knee had gone out, and none of those machines had any, and I say handrail for step up. This is it's like a half step up for a platform. So it's not a big step. It's not a high platform that you got to have a railing. It's just a small step up platform, but there's nowhere for you to grab. Well, we had operators at the time that had knee surgery, right? They'd had something, and they'd still be working. They could still do part of they could still work, modified, but they would need to get up and down this platform. And so again, you've got nowhere to anchor yourself up and down. You've got nowhere to catch when you fall. So had we had noticed these the couple times he had his knee going out while he was up on a platform, maybe there would have been something installed beforehand. So that's where again you get this pyramid.
So you're talking about precursor incidents, and
yep.
They still happened, but you said had we have known. So really it gets to like the tree falling in the forest, nobody's there to hear it. Did it really fall? It's if that almost happened to somebody, but they don't report it, did it really happen? And that's it. Well, yeah, no, it didn't, because we weren't given the opportunity to intervene, to see if we could solve for that. So you're bringing up like reporting culture, right? And
yep.
You can only track what gets reported. And this is the problem. I don't want to say the problem with safety, but we are so like with operations, and when I do some of our classes, when I do like a root cause class, I like to show a chart to the operations folks where I show like drift, right? Yep. It's really a tight line to work as expected for them, because they have all of these tools that they use to tell them when, volume is off, or like, and they can intervene right away and snap that back in line. With safety, our control chart is when something bad happens, and then we come in. So if we could build in more of those signals, like those andons, if you will, or those alarms, and I call that reporting culture, it is still heavily dependent on people, like raising a hand and saying, we haven't automated near miss reporting yet, right? You know what I mean? So that's a challenge. Do you find that with the folks you talk to and you teach and instruct, that's still a challenge to get people to speak up?
Yeah, and I think so. And that, just again, I lean back on my experience for a second. But we had, we were calling it was behavior-based safety, but then we called it precautionary-based safety, and then they changed it again. We had one of these, self-assessment or peer assessment, what I generally call peer assessment, right? So we're out there looking, and no one ever reported someone stumbling around on one of these platforms or near falling off these platforms. Nobody ever reported on this set. And so, the opportunity, the stuff was there for them to have submitted it, but nobody said, hey, this is a problem I want to submit today because we noticed it. Now, that guy knew about it, right? And the leadership knew he had a bum knee, right? He's a 74-year-old guy. A lot of those guys have bum knees, right? So they're aware of the condition. But if we're waiting simply on that signal to come through, I think there's some problem there. When I like to think about management systems, you've kind of got two problems that you want to look at separately. One is looking at this, oversight and relations is what we call it in TapRooT. It's in our management systems, oversight and relations. And in there is what they call the two-way street. Now, a lot of people nowadays are calling this psychological safety.
Psychological safety, yep.
Yep. Or do people feel comfortable enough about bringing it up? So I think one element of it is making sure that people feel comfortable enough to say, hey, I screwed up, and management not to be like, oh, you screwed up. All right, let's give them the hatchet. They've got to feel comfortable enough to give that incident report. But at the same time, management on the opposite side of that has to be communicating and celebrating when people bring up the near misses, the real near misses. Because like I said, we were doing BBS reporting, and we were reporting lots, right? We had lots of stuff was being reported. Thousands of things were being reported. But out of those things, what was actually, none of those ever really tied out to the incidents that we had later. So it kind of thinks, if you think the pyramid, all those near misses, all those behavior reportings that we had, well, did any of those, oh, we fixed them because we found them there? And no, because a lot of those were repeats, right? You see the same thing pop up and up again. So it's not that we're fixing all the problems we've talked about. It's just that we're reporting the things we know about, and the things that we don't think about are sometimes the things that are hurting us. And so I think that that's where management has a portion of this with creating, right, you said, a reporting culture. But I think it also is, how do you proactively go out and look for these opportunities in ways that are unique, and not just the same person going and looking at their same area and picking out the same thing every week.
We used to call them cross audits. When I was doing consulting, I would ask about this. How often do you go on safety walks and this, that, and the other? Not just observations, because the mere presence of you observing somebody changes behavior. So you can make an argument that, standing there observing somebody is not very useful because of that. But looking at physical conditions of tools, materials and storage and equipment, and how we interact with that work environment, there's something useful there, obviously. And I would ask folks how often they go out, and they're like, I'm in my area every day. I'm like, no, not your area. Somebody else's area, a different process, because you got to get a different set of eyes on this and look at it from a different point of view. It's like the wallpaper effect, right? Like, I don't even notice that backdrop behind you now. You couldn't, if you were to ask me, like, if the first, minute we were talking, if you hit, shut off your camera and said, describe my backdrop, I would have been like, it's, gray, it's geometric. But like, 15, 20 minutes into this interview, if you would have stopped and asked me, I would be like, I have no idea, because I'm so into focusing on what you're saying and having this discussion. You tend not to notice those things after a while. You almost, it becomes blurred or just blends into the landscape. So in order for you to break out of that, you've got to go to a different area. You've got to change things up. It's the reason why signs have a useful lifespan of like 3 days, because if you move it around or change it up, people will notice. But you keep it hanging there, nobody notices.
Oh, don't get me started on hanging signs.
Yeah. Labels fix everything, Alex. You didn't know that?
They do.
They do. I always joke, I would have had a very short career if somebody would have just told me early on, if you could just tell people not to get hurt, you would have saved me 26 years in this industry. But
I had to stop my supervisors when reporting out. They used to report out that one of the corrective actions they did was counsel the operator to be more careful.
Coaching.
And I said, never again. Never again will you ever say that to me. I'm glad you did it. You should continue to tell them, but that's not a fix. That doesn't fix anything.
Yeah.
That likely won't even stop them the next time.
Oh, and what's great about that is that what's funny is that, like, most people aren't, let's just be frank. I'm going to be frank. I'm not speaking for you. This is Blaine talking, everybody, not Alex. Most people aren't stupid, right? Most of us aren't dumb.
Agree to disagree. Agree to disagree.
We're good at what we do. Our operators, by and large, right? They're good at what they do. They're not dumb. So if that person could make an error, a human error, so too can most other people. So what we're saying with coaching, this is what I tell people, is that we have to stand there and wait for everybody else that comes through that process, that ever works with that process on different shifts, different months, as they change career. At everybody, we have to just sit and wait, and we'll end up coaching everybody at some point. Because if that person could have done it, other people could have done it. So why not look at the process? Maybe there's something we can do to make it more resilient to human error. Like, we know if Blaine made that mistake, and we could admit that Blaine's not a complete moron, I may argue with you on that one, then we could probably deduce that others would probably fall victim to that too. Because, right, it's human error is human.
In where we get human error for us is the start of an investigation, because anyone can make a mistake. Anyone on their best day and on their worst day can mess up. And, I like to think of it this way. Mark, he gave you his kind of history last time he was on here.
Yeah.
He spent 2+ years when he got his master's degree in human factors. He spent 2+ years at Navy hours, the 80-hour week studying human error. Most of us will never get that level of expertise, right? Where we just focus in on something for 2 years straight. And even he makes errors. So if a guy who's an expert on human error makes errors, you're never going to coach, you're never going to train people and tell them enough to not make mistakes. You've got to look at the process, you've got to look at the system. And, my definition of human factors is making it intuitive to do right, hard to do wrong. Good human factors makes things intuitive to do right and hard to do wrong. So if we're focusing on our system and anything that we're doing that makes it a little more intuitive to do it the right way, a little bit more difficult to do it the wrong way, that's the way you're going to prevent people from making mistakes. That's how you start with solve human error. Is focusing on that human understanding and maybe tweaking it just a little bit. Get those incremental improvements to make it more likely you have the desired outcome and less likely that they will deviate.
Yeah, and you've brought up, to kind of get back to what we started with. I mean, because it's all related. I mean,
Yep.
well, it's this big ball of wax, right? You can't pick any one of these things we've been talking about and go, just do this one. You have to do all of these things. And that's challenging. It can seem daunting, but luckily there are folks like yourself, organizations like yours that help, safety, qualified, adequate, safety professionals that help organizations, which is why I do the podcast. We're constantly learning myself. I'm sitting in that group too. So getting back to the near misses or precursor incidents, that's why it's critical that, and this is the rub. Yeah, you could say, wait, I have to investigate a paper cut. Well, maybe, but all of them you have to at least stop and look, right? I mean, there's something you're going to have to do with all of these before you'll know, yeah, there's something to be had here. Yes, a paper cut, like you described, with the eye, that you're gonna look at that, even if you get to the point where you're like, well, there's not much we can control there. But it's a lot different than somebody that is just grabbing a sheet of paper off the printer and gets, oh wow, I got a little paper cut, and they come and report a near miss, or that technically that's a first aid if they need to put a Band-Aid on it. You still have to look at it. So to me, it goes back to what we started to talk about, which is, I know the new, being 26 years into this, we had a different word for it, but now the new word is the phrase is psychological safety. It's all right, it's all correct, but how do we get the workforce, by and large, comfortable? Remove fear. 14 Deming's 14 principles of leadership, or what is that? He had 14 principles. I did a whole episode on it. I can't even remember now. It's like 100 episodes ago. One of them is remove fear, right? And drive out fear, I think is what he said. And that's leadership. Leadership in my mind is it's really, you got to have a willing participant in the employee, yes. And there's a certain percentage of employees that it doesn't matter what leader you put in there, they're gonna be like, your leadership, no way am I telling you anything. But we don't let the exception drive the process. We manage the exception, but by and large, people will get on board. To me, it's all leadership, right? So how critical is it that leaders get formal training and really understand their role in not safety leaders, like management?
Yeah, so I think it's extremely important that people get training on topics for understanding more on the leadership side of it. Because if I was going to tell anybody, how do you improve culture? How do you get people to follow and follow you? I think the first thing that I did when I got on the floor is you have to go out, listen, and then when you have a problem, you've got to actually fix it as quick as possible. And I mean, you've got to hear their concern and actually get it taken care of, and so that connection can be made. So if we're thinking about precursor incidents, for example, if you're a leader and you want to build a culture of people reporting problems and people, actually feeling comfortable enough, Well, the first time you go out, you've got to go out with the mindset of, I want to discover these issues. And when you discover one, you've got to celebrate. You've got to give that enforcement of, hey, this is a great find, and you actually have to fix it. Because I've seen people that go out and they find things and they don't fix them, and they've lost the entire floor at that point. I've seen people that have gone out and they've just fixed something and they celebrated what they fixed, but it wasn't a real problem for people. And again, you've lost the floor there. So the only way you can really build that is if you're going out with that open mind, with those ears, your two ears, not your one mouth, your two ears there, and listen, finding problems that match the criteria of what you're looking for, right? You're out there to look for precursor type issues, and then fix it in a way that it eliminates it so that these guys go, hey, if we bring problems to this person, not only do they fix it, but they listen to us when they fix it, and they put in place something that's not just more training for me. It's not just more burden on my shoulders as the guy on the floor. This is something that takes that burden off of me. And I think if that's the mindset that we go out at the early stages of whatever we're implementing, of go out, listen, take the burden off of people and help them out and get them to something that they care about, you'll get a lot more commitment for the people to go say, well, hey, the next time I have this, I can go report it. The next time I have this, I'm going to share it with Blaine because he's the guy that actually gets it done.
Blaine fixes nothing. Oh, no, that's blame.
Sorry. Blame.
Yeah. Enunciate. All right. So what I heard there is key. And, you just reminded me of something, and that is, it's almost opportunistic. We have to look for opportunities that are meaningful, right? Because we've all seen the ones that fix something that really is not bothering anybody, right? They're just clearly trying to get ahead and show that they care. And it's just going out and fixing stuff. But something you said is like, not going to add more burden on me. And that is something we talk a lot about on our podcast and in my circles. And that is simplifying processes. I went, this is many years ago, one of my clients, when I first engaged with them, and I came to this point in our discovery process where I'm like, okay, what opportunities do workers have to report concerns or hazards? And they're like, oh no, we give them like all kinds of opportunities to report concerns. They just don't do it. And I'm like, oh, okay. What do you mean they don't do it? And they're like, well, we've got this, and they hold up. I'm taking my notes here while you talk. They held up this card, and they said they filled this card out. And I'm like, okay, walk me through that process. I'm like, well, the card's in the front office. I'm like, okay, this is a casting plant that's like half a mile long. I mean, quite literally, it's like that long. It's like you land a plane on the roof, right? So they have to stop their operation. If they're on the casting floor, 2 flights up, I mean, it's a casting floor. They're in the spacesuit, right? They're in this, and they have a concern. They have to hold on to that until they're done with their shift or go to lunch. Well, they're not going to do it at lunch. It's a union shop. They're not going to do it at lunch. They're going to go eat lunch, right? They have to remember that until such a time that they can get out of their suit, drink some Gatorade, come down the flights of stairs, walk half a mile to the front office, quarter of a mile if they're in the middle, whatever. But you know what I'm getting at. Mm-hmm. Fill out this form, and we're not done. They got to take it with them back, hand it to their supervisors. The supervisor signs it, but then that form has to then go back to the front into this box where once a week the safety committee, once a week they're collected, and then once a month the safety committee. By then, it's like a month in arrears. It's like that delay, you've made it is so impossible. Like no reasonable person is going to do that.
Yep.
And they're complaining to me, the consultant, why aren't these people reporting? I'm like, I wouldn't. It's a burden. You've actually created a complicated process, and when they can't or won't follow it, you complain about it. So we've got to make it easy. Have you seen or heard of really easy ways, like other than verbal? I mean, the easiest way is to be present and make yourself available to people so they can talk to you. That's the best way. And then you, the supervisor, you take your dang notes, right? Don't make them do it. But like, what tips do you have, or thoughts do you have on that?
So I go back to, at least to get them to do it, you have to simplify it as much as possible, and you have to make it convenient for them at that time.
Yeah.
So we had it on our reporting thing, we had it every workstation, and it was digital. It was a little link. You click it, pop it up. It was like you could scan your badge to get information in there or anything like it. It was very minimal for what they had to do.
Mm-hmm.
I won't state that that gets you the best reporting, but at least it was done. People
Yeah.
would do it. Um, I think another thing that I don't think gets done very well. So, we talk about it in our 5-day course. We talk about a term called soon certain positives, and the idea is incentives drive behavior. And so, if you've got something like, what you've just described is what I would call a soon certain negative. The fact that I have to walk across a facility. If I got to walk quarter of a mile is too much. You said a half a mile. Quarter
Yeah.
of a mile is too much for me to walk to do anything.
We
You know,
measured it.
a quarter of a mile to get to the lunchroom is too far, probably, for
Right.
some guys. So the idea that if you have to, it's a negative, right? So I have a soon certain negative. I'm not going to do that unless I have an extreme positive. If you gave me $10 for everything I reported, I'd walk a quarter of a mile for $10. I could do that. But you've got to have a soon certain positive that balances out that negative. So I think your recommendation is probably the better one, which is, okay, we need to simplify this so that we don't have this negative, make it as easy as possible for them to report. But then at the same side, there's a benefit to reporting, whether that's time, whether that's effort, whether that's motivation or bonuses, or there's an intrinsic good thing that happens when I do this. That's something else that I think is often missing from a lot of programs that are trying to encourage and incentivize people to actually report. Now, there's a bad side to this, and you've got to be very careful, because not every report is worthwhile. And so, if you rewarded everything that was reported, you're going to get a bunch of reports, but they're not going to be worth something. So you've got to balance out and really think about how are you gaming the system, and what are you trying to get them to do? Because if let's say again, we'll just throw a $10 gift card out there. If I gave somebody a $10 gift card every time they reported something, well, I've got a guy I know, he'd report every week.
Yeah.
The value of that would be garbage, because
I got a list of stuff I can report. I'll just drip it out.
Yeah.
Week, right?
So you've got to have some really, you got to think about it is your incentive going to drive the extreme wrong behavior too?
Yep.
So it's got to make sense. But I think that comes into the, celebrating the wins when they come up in the right way, and making sure that your incentives are such that it's going to encourage the right behavior, but not encourage it in a, let's say, perverse way, right?
I think you're right. I think having I don't want to say grading system, but I'll say grading system for a way to kind of qualify qualitatively, not quantitative. I mean, you want the reports in, and then you can kind of, at least you have the opportunity to decide, okay, this is something we need. This is something we probably don't need, but you need that feedback loop. You have to get back to the worker and say, but here's why. But we want you to keep it up. We want you to keep the ideas coming. Somebody asked me once. They said, "Hey, we've got." They did safety concerns and safety suggestions, they were like, "How do I like? We want to reward safety concerns, but like we get a lot of safety suggestions. How do I determine between the two?" And I was like, "Well, if you don't do it, is somebody at risk?" Right? Is there a regulatory requirement to have this in place? Was something in place and now it's not working and it's broken? Stuff should be obvious that, okay, this is a safety hazard or a concern. This is something that we're not currently doing. We're not required to do it. It's something that's reasonable. And yeah, it could also help reduce radio. That's a suggestion. That's like, hey, I got an idea, right? So you got to have a way of kind of racking and stacking these things. Because you're right, you're going to get inundated with all of these things, and you can't just create work orders for maintenance. They're going to want to know, what should I do first? you
Yep.
know?
And
So you do have to look at them, like you said, have some sort of a way to manage the ones that come in. So you prioritize them. And I love what you said about incentive. Sometimes the best incentive is, and I did a whole episode on this too. We won't go too deep on incentives because I can go either way on those. But employee spotlight in the newsletter, at the stand-up meeting. Hey, Alex caught something yesterday. Do catch of the week. We used to do that when I was at GE Aviation. We had a little fish on a hook, and it was a catch of the week, safety catch of the week. There's so many cheap, and I don't mean that in a bad way, just inexpensive, like free ways to recognize and reward people for making an effort that really just take our time. That's the most valuable investment we can make as leaders in an organization is our time spent on
and
this.
I think you're right on with that. As long as you can get it localized and personal,
Yep.
that's where it comes in. Because I found, sometimes like a corporate safety spotlight doesn't really work the same way, because the guy at this plant doesn't really care about the guy at the other plant.
Correct.
They want to see that the people that they want to see two things. They want to see, one, that you're willing to reward the guy that's crabby, that hates his life and kind of hates the job, but he
Yeah.
brought up something that was really good. And if
Yeah.
you're willing to reward him, that kind of gets them, hey, anybody can win this.
Yeah.
This is like, as long as they get a good sniff, so that's kind of part of it, but it's got to be localized enough that they feel it's personal. So those are, I think, really important from like kind of an incentive structure. Another thing that I think is really important that you're touching on, again, bringing this back to the pyramid, you know, if you just have all these things getting reported, let's say we're putting this on, manufacturing side, industrial safety guy. Well, now he's got to track and trend, and he's got to sort through and recategorize. You've created a lot of, safety paperwork.
Yeah.
And that's what you don't want to do, because you don't want to just make safety clutter, right? We don't want to just add more stuff onto the safety guy that he has to deal with and sort through. So again, this is where that pyramid is a bit wrong, because if I just want to report all near misses, well, not all near misses are important. What can we do to narrow in the focus? And I think, again, giving structure and criteria, like you were saying, structure and criteria to the people reporting, the people looking, is a really good way to help them with that. We talk about the energy wheel, and I think you and I kind of had a
Yeah.
LinkedIn conversation about the energy wheel. And
I
there's
love that.
there's some benefits to it.
Yeah.
From a structure of, you're giving people specific things to look at. There's also, it sometimes narrows people too much, and then you get people reporting the same thing again and again. So you've got to balance those benefits. But by providing something that gives you a talking point, you're okay. We're helping them focus in on. Like, I don't want to just look at all the places that we could fall. I want to look at specific types of falls that have a certain amount of energy. Or I want to look at specific types of, trenching requirements. Or I want to look at specific types of heat, that I'm dealing with. And if it's above this temperature, then we need to care about, then we need to do some focus on it. But if it's under that, then, well, okay, that's hot, but that's not, that's not dangerous hot. That's like, okay, I might get a small blister, but I'm not going to severely burn my hand and need major surgery.
Right.
So that there's a difference in there, and getting people to kind of, how do you focus them? But any tools that you give to help structure that, you're going to get better results, which is going to take, again, that burden off the safety man for having to do all his categorization work.
Yeah, and my listeners I'm gonna sense the collective eye roll here, because they're gonna go, oh, Blaine's gonna mention this again. But that's the power of a digital system, a digital safety management system, or just a digital means of providing workers the opportunity to report these, because you can kind of put them through a workflow, as long as it's not too cumbersome. But you can filter it can organize that for you, right? And the cream rises to the top, right? The ones you really want to know about can be escalated, prioritized. The system can flag those and go, hey, Blaine, you got this thing that got reported, and these other ones are very low priority, more suggestions, but still you'll give them their due. But yeah, and you mentioned something like that a lot of folks overlook. And I had this conversation last week with a colleague, and that is, the crab, if you're willing to reward the crabby guy or gal, right? And this is the conversation I had with two managers many, many years ago. And it's exactly what happened. Somebody came to me. I was new at the organization, and they were like, new guy doesn't know me yet. I'm going to bend his ear and see what I can get done, right? Calls me over. Is at a project on a project site, points to these things. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. That shouldn't be the condition that it's in. That shouldn't be there, right? So I go over to the foreman and I said, I'll use my own name to save some embarrassment, but say, hey, Blaine called me over there, and they went, well, I'm just going to stop you right there. You got to know Blaine. And I just stopped him. And I said, no, I don't. All I got to know is what Blaine's saying valid. Like, I don't need to know Blaine. Blaine gripes about everything, but you know what? Don't give him stuff to gripe about. You want to shut Blaine up? Go fix this stuff. Don't give him any reasons, because all I did was go and verify what Blaine was saying, not focused on how he said it or how often he says stuff. You got to be 100. And I've told this to my teams. HR is in the same boat, man. It's a terrible position to be in, because we all get burned out, right? The workers can't see that. When a worker comes to like HR and has a problem with their benefits or a question, they're like, this is the fifth worker today. It's like, well, they don't know that, and you can't have that attitude with them. You're just going to turn them off, right? Yep. Safety is the same way. We have to be 100% of the time, and that is hard. That is hard. And so I have always been very hard on myself when somebody comes to me and then somebody goes, well, you got to know like this person. And I'm like, no, I don't. This person could come to me 3 times a day. If what they're saying is valid, that's all I care about. Don't give them any reasons. So you're right. I love that. If you are willing to recognize that person and point out what they're saying is valid and we're going to fix it, then I think that says a lot about leadership, to look past that.
And I think to tie it to the other side of that as well, because anything we do, if you're always rewarding the opposite side of the crabby guy, as the brown nosers, or your favorites, they pretend. Every manager, we'd say we don't have any favorites, but ask yourself which kid is the favorite one. You know as a parent which one's the favorite. At least which one do you go, I don't have to worry about this one as much. That's your favorite. But if you're not giving only that guy the reward too, that's kind of the flip side of that. So you got to make sure that you're being just with it. The criteria are known and they're achievable by anybody that has that, they've seen it and they want it fixed, and they're bringing up that problem. I think another thing that often gets missed with this too, people bring up things. A lot of people will bring up things they have no idea how to fix, and because they don't have an idea, and maybe the person they're telling it to doesn't really feel comfortable in knowing what to fix it either. So sometimes the manager or the supervisor might kind of BS it a little bit and play it off because they're insecure in how to actually fix it. And I think that's where, if we could really report it, well, we can get it in front of people that will go through and do an analysis, do RCA, take it through, a process and find root cause and come up with corrective actions that will address the actual issue. And I think that's where people, again, they want to see that their concerns get brought and taken through a process, and they're not just brushed off or put into a filing cabinet. Those little submit boxes are nice sometimes because you can get a lot of stuff, but a lot of times people feel like you put it in there and it disappears forever. I think there's a shredder, right? I think I've seen that. There's the suggestions go straight into the shredder, right? That's a meme I've seen. But they imagine that. So again, not only do you celebrate when somebody brings it up, but if you can make it transparent about the process that happens after, that's another good thing that brings it up for getting people to actually buy in. Having it transparent, having, maybe they're involved in the process, or maybe that person is they're shown at least the process that went through it. So that way, not only they say, hey, my thing was heard, but they came in, they brought it up, and they gave me the results back. I knew a lot of people that they fixed things and never really told it to the person that brought it up. And so that person felt like they never got the credit for bringing up the problem.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, engineer got the pat on the back because they fixed the problem, but they never gave it to Joe down here on the floor, who actually was the one that saw it. And so I think that's again, being really transparent about, these problems and fixes, and making sure that people know about what we found and what we fixed, I think is a part of that too.
I loved, in my past, we had a system that you could, at anywhere, every fabricator had a every welder, it didn't matter. They had a workstation, right? All they did was click, like you said, it was a link on the home screen. They clicked it, they enter their concern, and it immediately went to the safety team and their manager. And we would ping the manager and say, hey, Blaine just reported this. Did you see that? Oh, I'm in a meeting right now. What's up? I'm like, well, hey, when are you at? Like, let's go. And we would go to their workstation together, like almost immediately, and go and say, hey, what's going on? Let's take a look. Let's see if there's something we need to intervene with right now, or is this something we can kind of noodle out later, And they saw that responsiveness. But also what was great about that system was when we worked with them, they were a part of the process. And when we, and I won't talk about our stand-up board, because it also had to get handwritten on the stand-up board. And then every shift meeting, we went down the list of suggestions or concerns that were escalated, and what state they're in, and when we expect them to be finished. So it kept everybody in the loop. But what was great was, if we said, like, we went into the system and said, we're going to close this out, here's what we did. If that worker is like, wait a minute, this is not what we talked about, this isn't what we talked about doing, the worker can reject it, and it opens it back up, and then alerts the manager and us again. And we go back out and go, what's going on? I thought we agreed to, no, that's not what we agreed. We can have that conversation. Their culture, they were slow to adopt, but once they figured out they're pulling the string, like, they loved it. They absolutely loved it. And only a few times they were like, nope, I need a whole new welding booth. It needs to be enclosed with air conditioning. The ridiculous, one. Very few times we had that. Most of them were reasonable. And you have to be willing to manage those exceptions and not just build a system to avoid the one or two problem children, right? Yep. Which is a lot of times what we do. We have we'll come up with 3 or 4 excuses why we shouldn't do something, but no real good reason why we can't. And that frustrates me. And if that's their leadership style and I'm seeing it, darn well everyone else is seeing it too, and probably the root of our problems, right? So that's a good call. I love that transparency. Sometimes it's just as simple as getting them involved in the process, seeing that we're going through a process, and it's not just Blaine deciding, it's not worth it, and I put it away. That we have others involved, and it's a managed process, and that brings some we say justice, right? We have to be just about it. It brings some fairness to all the submittals, because it goes through the process, and the process kind of vets that out, susses all that out, right? Good stuff. Man, see, we can get going for a while on this stuff, and we're probably not even done. There's no way we're done. I mean, we could talk forever.
We've got a JRE podcast length.
There you go. There you go. Now, if we could only get the audience. All right. So I don't even care about the money. It's just the audience. See, I'm such a nerd that, okay, I do care about the money, but the more people that hear and have these conversations and hear these conversations and can walk away from hearing these conversations and having them in their organizations, that is important, right? And I'm sure you get a lot of satisfaction out of what you do as well for that reason.
Yeah, I kind of count my successes on the stories of my clients when they come back 5-6 years and they go, oh, hey, this is, look at what our TIIR was, look at what our fatality rate was, and here's us now. And you're like, oh, that's great news. Thanks. Yeah. So we get a list of kind of those. And I think, for us, we kind of, you live off those high moments enough to carry you through the frustrated you're with the client that you just gotta, bang the head against the wall for a little bit,
Yeah. Does
and
any of this really matter? Right. And then you have those, yes, it
exactly.
does matter. Nice.
So I think we live off those. And for us here at System Improvements and TapRooT, our thing is about changing the way people solve problems and what they're focusing on. And I think, whether it's providing a structure to RCA, or in the case of what we're talking about, making sure you're providing a structure. If there's one thing that people can do after leaving this, and they should be inspired, hopefully, to do, is to go out and take whatever their reporting process is, and think about how do you narrow them down to something has that significance, and what tools can we give them to make it easy, to make it where we're giving them criteria that is intuitive, that's understandable, and that's going to take the burden off them, take the burden off the safety guy, and make it clean and quick, that we can find the problems, because we need to investigate those. We want to investigate things. I think you can find problems before it becomes an incident. You can't maybe find all of them that way, but you could be very proactive. And I've seen clients that they stopped having fatalities, and they said, well, we don't have any fatalities, but we want to keep applying the process.
Right.
Well, okay, what's the next thing we could do? Well, we're going to do it for all our recordables. Well, okay, now we don't have recordables anymore. Well, what are we going to apply it to next? Well, we're going to go find precursors. We're going to go take our audit findings. You find nonconformities every day in your audits.
Yep.
What are you doing from an RCA standpoint? What are you doing from a structured approach to looking for? And I think if you just have the checkbox kind of audits where you're just looking at the same thing, well, yeah, you can help with those. But if when you find a nonconformity, you don't stop and go, well, hey, let's do a little mini RCA here. Let's do a little bit of a mini thing to understand what was going on and ask some better questions. I think you don't capitalize on those moments when they come up.
Absolutely. 100%. And I often said, I've said this, gosh, I don't know how many times, my team would say, one of my specialists or safety coordinators would say, hey, good day today, or hey, good week, no incidents. I'm like, are you sure? That makes me uncomfortable. So let's go out and make sure it was by design, that it was because we have the right processes in place and the right, levels of protection, and that they're working, and that no incidents was by design. And the only way we're going to do that is to go out there and stress test our processes. Go out and see, how well we're doing with 5S, housekeeping, machine guarding, PPE compliance, like stuff like that. And maybe we're just getting lucky, and this is the calm before the storm, because, we can rest on those laurels. We can go, everything's good, and you coast. And the only time you've ever coast is if you're going downhill. So that's what I always say. Oh, man. All right, Alex, where can folks go to learn more about you and TapRooT Systems Improvement, all that good stuff?
Easiest place to find us is at taproot.com. That's the easiest place, our website. You can sign up for our newsletter. You can check out our blog. If you want, you can reach out to me if you want to learn more about TapRooT root cause analysis. You can reach me at alex@taproot.com.
Nice. And I do have to say this. I say this a lot when I talk to other safety pros, geeks like myself. No affiliation. TapRooT has not paid the podcast to talk about any of this stuff. It's just a couple of safety pros connecting, getting together on something that I feel is extremely critical in our industry. If you look at the root of why we're here as safety professionals, what we're here to prevent, TapRooT, these tools we've been talking about, for anybody watching or listening, like this is it. This is what we need to do. This is what we got to focus on. We can learn all the regs, we learn all the safety rules and policies and procedures, and we write some, and everything. But when it comes down to it, if we're not able to systematically find and fix deficiencies or improve our processes, what are we doing? We're not going to be very good at what we do, right?
We're gonna just keep doing the same thing again and again and expect different results.
I think that's called insanity. Something like that. Alex, always a pleasure. We're going to do this again. We're going to have a regular TapRooT jam session going on. If you don't mind, I don't mind. It gives me something to talk about. I love it. All right. So we'll drop links in the show notes to taproot.com as well as Alex at taproot.com. And check out Alex on LinkedIn as well and connect with him. And I guess, follow TapRooT on LinkedIn as well, because you guys announce when you're having you do an annual, what do you call it?
TapRooT Summit.
The TapRooT Summit. That's right. You are a good friend of the podcast, Lori Frederick. She actually just did a takeover episode this past week because I'm traveling, but great friend of the podcast. But the Movement Ninja, Lori Frederick, she's a presenter at your conference.
Yeah,
right?
she was just there. She was just there at the summit. We had it in May. I can't remember if she's got a session in the one in Houston. We've got next year, and we're going to be at the Margaritaville in Cano, Texas, outside of Houston there. And we're doing, that's the last week in April 2023. And so that's our next summit there.
Maybe we'll see. Maybe we can coordinate something. Maybe I could podcast from there, do some live streaming, stuff like that. Highlight some of the good, a lot of the good work you guys are doing. So, all right, I'll drop links to all that good info so folks can check it out and get totally jacked about deep diving these incidents. All right. Thanks, Alex. I appreciate it, buddy.
All right, there you have it. Alex Paradies from TapRooT. Be sure to visit his LinkedIn profile and connect with Alex there, as well as go to the TapRooT website and learn more about what they're doing over there. If any of you want to see the full video of this interview, head on over to the Safety Pro Podcast community. The link is in the show notes. It's free to watch this video, and it's also free to join. If you want to participate in a conversation, create content or posts on the community site, reply, comment, and even participate in live chats, live streams, then you do have to become a premium member. Otherwise, I will talk to you on the next Safety Pro podcast.